Now, a word about animals on the Mark Thompson Show.
And how about it for Karen Dawn, everyone? She joins us with the good and the bad. There were some losses some like really, the animal rights and animal activism and just the community that cares about animals lost some key figures in the last couple of weeks.
But we've still got Wayne LaPierre.
Yeah. Evil don't die.
I was so surprised to hear all that stuff about him not being a really great guy. I really was.
But there was, there's already, because for the heck of it, already a lot of love for your hair, apparently. Love the hair, they say.
Yeah. Yay,
Yeah.
I washed it this morning for a change. Elijah McClain. Now, the good thing about being outside is that Texas winters are heavenly. The bad side is that Elijah is out here with me finding lots to bark at, but I don't know if you can hear him. Can you hear him?
No, we don't hear him. It's okay. This is from Edward Lee, and Edward, big shout out for the super chat. He says, in memory of Flaco, New York City's beloved owl. Maybe we should start there. It is sad news.
You know what? It is. The reason I want to start with Steve Wise, if I may, is because
as usual, I didn't get the note on that. All right, go ahead. Yes.
Because, humans matter too, people tell me, and humans are animals. And because their deaths are so closely connected, Mark, and I want to tie them in together, if I may. Steve died on February 15th, and we didn't get a chance to talk about that last week because Monday was a holiday. But Steve was an animal rights attorney and well known enough that his death was also announced on the front page of the New York Times and certainly in Florida where he had lived. The reason his death is so relevant to Flacos is that whereas, there are people who say veganism is the bottom line of the animal rights movement and whatever, which I most certainly don't necessarily agree with. What Steve argued for beautifully in the courts of law, including the New York Supreme Court, was bodily liberty and bodily integrity. And that is what's so closely tied into Flaco's situation, is that Flaco, for most of his life, he wasn't free. And Steve died, before we learned about Flaco being killed. It would have been lovely to hear what he would have had to say on the whole issue, but he died about 10 days ago. But he was head of the Non-Human Rights Project, and I'd love people to go check it out. Steve taught animal law at Harvard, and there was a wonderful documentary on his life, a Penny Baker Hagedis documentary, and I'm not that familiar with their work, but I'm sure some of your regular listeners and chatters will be, called Unlocking the Cage. And fascinating documentary, completely enjoyable, not full of horrible animal cruelty stuff, utterly fascinating about Steve's battles on behalf of animals in courts of law. And you and I have spoken on this show about his battle to get Happy freed from the Bronx Zoo, which incidentally was the place that somebody did free Flaco from. And then Steve took that case all the way to the New York Supreme Court, where they did not win, but where they got two judges to dissent who would have ruled in favor of Happy. It's not just a matter of her getting out of the Bronx Zoo, which would have been an animal welfare issue, but he was arguing for her personhood, because under our current laws, human beings are persons and animals are things or objects. And that was Steve's main contention, that it's not right that animals, and he started with chimpanzees who are so close to us and elephants who are so intelligent. He suggested that it was ridiculous that they are objects or things under the law. And he got a couple of New York Supreme Court judges to agree with him. And if he'd lived, it kills me that he died about getting close to 2 weeks ago, and he will not get to see his dream come true. But the Non-Human Rights Project continues. and is, of course, going to continue to battle for a legal system that does not see animals strictly as things. And there are other countries who have granted animals some actual rights, but as yet, our country has yet to do that. So they're still objects here, but that is starting to change. And when we see the outpouring, first we had the delight that Flaco was out flying around New York for a year. And I remember when you and I spoke about this on your show, Mark, I remember your absolute giggle of delight when you heard that he was out, soaring around the skies and looking in people's windows. And people were just delighted that he was out. And of course, people were scared that he was going to be killed. But there are certainly those of us who think that, the fact that he lived for a year before he died is highly relevant to this situation. And it was really interesting in that the New York Times article, the first one that came out online to announce his death, which I think was on Thursday, came out. I included a quote from it that I hope Tony can bring up. If not, I'm just going to paraphrase it. But it mentioned the size of Flaco's enclosure at that Central Park Zoo, which is run by the same people as the Bronx Zoo, the World Conservation Society.
You have that, Tony?
I did.
Yeah.
It doesn't, that's my tweet about it, and we can go there. That's fine if Tony wants to bring back my tweet because I put succinctly how I feel about it. But Mark,
it's so small, but you can see how tiny. I'm sorry.
No, you can. No, that's not his enclosure.
No, that
is him looking through.
Do you have
a
the quote, Tony,
at
that you sent? Do you not? You don't have it? No. Okay.
But we can talk about this for a second. This is Flaco looking through the enclosure not looking through somebody's window and that night and into her apartment, and it's okay. And what I wrote next to that photo was just that: where's the Bronx Zoo, the World Conservation Society, is out there saying, whoever let him out of his enclosure is responsible for his death. I say no, they were responsible for him having 1 year of actual life after 13 years spent in an enclosure that last week's New York Times article described as the size of a department store window display. This is the quote there, where they mentioned that where he was born and that he was originally put in with some other animals, but then later he was moved to an enclosure the size of a department store window near the Penguin House exit. And that is where somebody decided to cut the netting and let him out. And if Flaco wanted to go back in because he liked getting his 3 square meals and feeling safe, he could have, and he wasn't stupid. But once he was out, he wasn't going anywhere back near that particular enclosure. And yes, he was in danger. Now, in the wild, owls probably fly around and bump into a tree limb occasionally. And if that happens, maybe they'll fall 15 feet. Unfortunately, if you bump into a skyscraper, you fall hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet. And it looks like that's what happened to Flaco. He took a wrong turn and he crashed into something that isn't in his natural environment and he died. But this is after having 13 years alone in a cell the size of a department store window and 1 year out flying around Manhattan. And I'm glad he got that. And I'm interested in knowing what folks in the chat think, because it seems that the vast majority of New Yorkers, while they're horribly distressed that he's been killed, we knew that had to come. He wasn't going to live for 40 years flying around Manhattan. But at least he got some freedom.
Yeah. It's an interesting dilemma that you point to or question. There is some of the graffiti art around him. I mean, you can't help but fall in love with him, You have 2 actually quite lovable creatures that have passed away, as I say in your report today. Steve Wise was just as remarkably gifted, as you suggest, erudite and top of the game attorney, representing a voice for the voiceless, right, for the animal kingdom. And then Flaco, I think I've been calling him Flaco, but Flaco is a creature that was granted, if you will, this freedom, as you've suggested it, for a year out in New York, both environments not natural habitats, I guess, on some level, but one so terribly restrictive. And then you make the point, and I think so beautifully. I'm just reflecting sort of out loud on what you've just said, which is he could have gone back if he wanted to. These owls are super smart and able to find their way. A lot of these creatures, when it comes to that world of finding their way back, can do it. Now, to be
Of course.
fair, it's a pretty brutal environment, that urban environment. I mean, you can't, maybe, I don't know, Bangkok, I guess, might be worse or something. But it's pretty brutal, New York City. Somehow he survived, and look how beautiful he is for all that
And
time
there he is,
in New York.
it takes you a second there to see where it looks like it could be enclosure, but no, there he is on a fire escape, just hanging out. And,
Yeah.
there's no question that if he wanted to go back to his little jail cell, he could have done that. He could have gone and hung around near it and they would have let him in. But he made his needs and his choices clear. Now, and it's interesting, this is how I feel about it. And this is what Steve argued for, which is just bodily liberty. And it's funny because, animal rights activism is so often closely associated with veganism, and that's the way I choose to eat but my reason for choosing veganism, and you mentioned actually that you don't think there's anything wrong with eating your neighbor's, rescues hen's eggs, and I feel exactly the same way. The reason I choose veganism is because in our society, eating any sort of animal food means locking animals up for life. And I don't think hunting's as bad as that. And hunting, I made my jokes about Wayne LaPierre, and that includes sport hunting and hideous stuff like that. But certainly, I don't think going out and killing your family's dinner is nearly as cruel as what we generally do, which is lock these animals up for life so that we can eat them. And here we had an animal locked up for his life so we could look at him. And I don't know how anybody could be angry at the person who let him out, but I'm not here to preach, and I am interested in knowing what people who are not animal rights activists feel about that kind of thing, and if that is somewhere we find common ground with people that, locking animals up to gawk at them isn't okay by most people's, most reasonable people's views, but we still do it anyway.
Well, then you get to question, especially now with conservation being an issue in so many different ways, an issue with many facets. One of them is, well, without zoos, sadly, you would have none of these creatures. Literally, the reproduction is manufactured or manipulated by the zoo culture. And of course, as you know where I am, I agree, but I see how the water gets a little murkier as we begin to essentially bulldoze these creatures into extinction. The only vestige of reproduction you have, and for the live creatures, is in zoos. And then
You know,
there's a whole range of zoos, isn't there, Karen Dawn? I mean, they're look, this poor
no,
creature, Flaco, was in this, and I'll shut up and let you talk. But it was in this small enclosure. But aren't there those that have larger, kind of, sort of arboretum size enclosures? Or
Flaco is at the Central Park Zoo, which is owned by the same people as the Bronx Zoo, which is the World Conservation Society, and this is supposed to be the top of the line. So if Flaco was in an enclosure, which according to the New York Times was the size of a window, a department store window, and the Associated Press described as the size of twice his wingspan, or a VW bus at the top of the line zoo, I'd say no, there aren't all different types. Sure, some zoos are much worse than others. There's roadside zoos which are absolutely disgusting, which should be without doubt banned. But for what you're saying about animals and extinction, that's what sanctuaries are for, where we can protect animals. And unfortunately, in our extremely polarized world, we have situations where we have zoos where animals are simply put on display so that we can look at them. And yes, they do some conservation work as well, but they don't look after the welfare of the individual, when the welfare includes company of other species, the ability to exercise their natural behaviors, like being able to fly if you're a bird. Um, or we have sometimes people who run sanctuaries, and there are those who say, oh, at sanctuaries, you shouldn't be able to go look at the animals. And of course, as usual, as you'll hear me so often say, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, the Tao, the middle way. We need situations where we can protect animals and where we can encourage them to breed without actually, forcing a male into a small female enclosure so that he can rape her and we can watch. But we can certainly encourage animals to breed, and we can keep them safe from predators if they are in a situation where they're actually endangered, and also give them wonderful lives. And the problem is, what's a wonderful life? And I generally, when people ask me that, I'll usually go to the question, because I am somebody who believes in a circle of life rather than a hierarchy of life. And I don't think that humans are fundamentally different from other animals. I say, well, what would the answer be if we were talking about a human? And it certainly wouldn't be to be unable to move in the natural way that you were built to move. For a human, it would be running or walking, and for an owl, it's flying. And it certainly wouldn't be in a enclosure twice the size of your arm length. And it would be where you could make your own choices about who you wanted to hang out with. And if you fall in love and you have family, you don't get separated from them. So I don't think it's as hard as society tries to make it out to be, to do the right thing by members of other creatures and also take into account things like protecting them. I think we can do both. And we certainly weren't doing both in Flaco's case. And just letting him out of that enclosure, was it ideal? No. Did it mean he was eventually going to probably be killed? Yes. But was it the best choice under those ridiculous circumstances that the supposedly one of the top zoos in the world had him in an enclosure like that? I think that person did Flaco and his kind and his ilk a favor, and I'm glad to get the chance to talk about that here.
It's a very complex issue, and your example about human beings is not theoretical. They did put human beings in zoos. You can look at what happened. I think I referenced it earlier in the Belgian Congo, where that's one example, but there are other examples as well. I mean, humans in zoos.
Astoundingly, there's a
pygmy populations, native populations.
Sadly, just last century, the Bronx Zoo in New York had, I think his name was Bengo. I'm trying to remember his name, but they had a young pygmy man in a zoo.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
that was
absolutely.
considered okay 100 years ago. I think we're going to look back at Flaco on display in a tiny little enclosure similarly. And I'm not saying he's exactly the same as this pygmy man. Anybody who knows me knows that I don't think humans are above other animals anyway. So if I was saying they were the same, I wouldn't be insulting the man. I might be insulting the owl. But yeah, we've done things in the past with humans, and now that we never would, it's time for us to look and say, why do we think it's okay to do that with members of other species? Because it's not.
Thank you for civilizing us today. I must wrap up. Thank you, Karen Dawn. It is Dawn Watch on Facebook. She has a vibrant community there, but you can also find her dawnwatch.com. And if you want news of how the media is talking about animals and just animals in general, great thing. And of course, her book is now being updated, and when it is complete, we will feature it prominently here. Karen Dawn, thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Mark.
That's a word about animals today.
Join the flock again next time for a word about animals on the Mark Thompson Show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.